One drop of blood. That was the promise. One tiny drop from your fingertip placed into a sleek black machine, and it would run hundreds of laboratory tests. Cancer markers, diabetes, infections. Faster than any lab, cheaper than any hospital, without a single needle. The woman behind it was 19 years old when she started. Silicon Valley crowned her the next Steve Jobs. Presidents posed with her. Billionaires wired her fortunes. At its peak, her company was worth $9 billion. There was just one problem. The machine didn't work. It never worked. This is the story of Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos, the woman who fooled Silicon Valley out of $9 billion. Elizabeth Holmes grew up telling relatives she wanted to be a billionaire. Not a scientist, not a doctor, a billionaire. When a family friend asked why not president, she reportedly answered that the president would marry her because she'd have the $1 billion. At Stanford, she studied chemical engineering for exactly 1 year. At 19, she dropped out with a patent application and a story. She was terrified of needles, and she was going to fix medicine. In 2003, she founded a company she named Theranos, a blend of therapy and diagnosis. And here you need to understand what Holmes understood instinctively. Silicon Valley doesn't invest in machines. It invests in stories. And her story was perfect. The teenage female founder in a male valley. The dropout, like Jobs. She began wearing black turtlenecks, like Jobs. She reportedly deepened her voice into a low baritone for effect. Every detail of the character was engineered, long before the technology was. There was just one flaw in the story. Blood doesn't care about stories. Getting hundreds of accurate tests from a single finger prick drop isn't an engineering challenge like fitting more music into an iPod. Many scientists will tell you it runs into the physics of the blood itself. A capillary drop is a messy, contaminated sample. Her professors told her it couldn't work. She heard it as doubt. She kept pitching. What Holmes built next was not a laboratory. It was a fortress of credibility. Her board of directors became the most decorated in startup history. George Shultz and Henry Kissinger, two former Secretaries of State, former senators, a former Secretary of Defense, General James Mattis. Old, powerful men of government and war. Notice what's missing from that list. Anyone who had ever run a blood test. The money followed the names. Rupert Murdoch invested roughly $125 million. The DeVos family, Carlos Slim, the Waltons of Walmart. In total, more than $700 million flowed in. And by 2014, Theranos was valued at $9 billion, making Holmes on paper the youngest self-made female billionaire in history. Inside the company, a different structure was forming. In 2009, Holmes's secret boyfriend, Sunny Balwani, a software executive nearly 20 years her senior with no medical background, became president and COO. Together, they ran Theranos like an intelligence agency. Departments were walled off from each other. Employees who asked how the device actually performed were shown the door. Chemists weren't allowed to talk to engineers. Only 2 people saw the whole picture. That's not how you build a medical device. It's how you hide the fact that you can't. In 2013, the story collided with the real world. Walgreens, one of America's largest pharmacy chains, signed on to put Theranos wellness centers in its stores, eventually spending $140 million on the partnership. Ordinary people could now walk in and get their blood tested on Holmes's revolutionary device, called the Edison. Here is what actually happened behind that wall. The Edison could only run a handful of tests, unreliably. So Theranos secretly bought commercial analyzers, machines made by Siemens, the same ones every normal lab uses, and diluted the tiny finger prick samples to stretch them enough to run on those machines. Diluting a sample below validated ranges is exactly what it sounds like. a recipe for garbage results. And these weren't demo numbers on a pitch deck anymore. These were real people. A result suggesting a miscarriage for a woman with a healthy pregnancy. False HIV indicators, wildly wrong potassium levels, the kind of number that decides whether a cardiac patient gets rushed to the ER. Doctors were making decisions on data that was, at times, little better than a coin flip. When investors visited, Theranos staged the show. A blood draw taken in the conference room would vanish into the lab, run on the hidden commercial machines, and come back as an Edison result. Validation reports were dressed with pharmaceutical logos, implying Pfizer had endorsed the technology. Pfizer had done no such thing. At every fork between confession and escalation, Holmes escalated. Empires of paper rarely fall to armies. They fall to individuals with a working conscience. This one fell to a 25-year-old junior employee named Tyler Schultz, the grandson of board member George Schultz. Working inside the lab, Tyler saw the failed quality checks, the cherry-picked data, the deleted outliers. He raised it internally and was slapped down. He told his grandfather. The former Secretary of State chose the company, siding, in effect, with Holmes against his own grandson. Theranos' lawyers hounded Tyler. His family spent hundreds of thousands on legal fees. He didn't fold. His information found its way to John Carreyrou, an investigative reporter at the Wall Street Journal. Holmes learned the story was coming and went to war. Legal threats, surveillance of sources, pressure on the journal's owner. Who owned the Wall Street Journal? Rupert Murdoch, her own $125 million investor. Holmes personally appealed to him to kill the story. To his credit, Murdoch refused to interfere. On October 15, 2015, the journal published, "Theranos was barely using its own devices. The Edison was a failure. The empire was a stage set." Holmes went on television the next day and delivered the Silicon Valley Catechism. First, they think you're crazy. Then they fight you. Then you change the world. It bought her time, but regulators were already in the building. Federal lab inspectors found deficiencies so severe they declared the lab an immediate danger to patient safety and banned Holmes from the industry. Walgreens terminated the partnership and closed every wellness center. 2 years of test results, nearly 1 million of them, were voided or corrected. Forbes revised Holmes's net worth from $4.5 billion to zero. In 2018, the SEC charged Holmes and Balwani with massive fraud. Then came the criminal indictments. The trial revealed everything: the faked reports, the hidden Siemens machines, the investors who never asked for audited financials while wiring 9-figure sums. In January 2022, a jury convicted Elizabeth Holmes on 4 counts of defrauding investors. She was sentenced to 11.25 years in federal prison. Sunny Balwani was convicted on all 12 counts against him, including defrauding patients, and received nearly 13 years. Both appealed. Both lost. Silicon Valley runs on a phrase: fake it till you make it. Overpromise, iterate, and let the demo run a little ahead of the truth. For a photo-sharing app, that's a growth strategy. Theranos is what happens when that culture touches human blood. Here's the question worth sitting with. Holmes never sold a single share of Theranos. She didn't cash out like the Enron executives. She may have believed her own story until the very end. Does that make her better than a common fraudster, or more dangerous? The last empire fell because of accounting. This one fell because of chemistry. The next one fell because of a leaked spreadsheet. A 30-year-old who lost $32 billion in 8 days. That story is next. Subscribe.